Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to today's webinar featuring payroll options for Stage 100 Contractor. Today's subject matter expert is Henry Lubis from Accordant Company. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone is muted for a clean listening experience. So if you do have questions, please type them into the questions box, and we will be happy to address them at the end of the session. This webinar will be recorded, and we will email out a copy to everyone later today. I will now turn it over to you, Henry.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Hope everybody's having a great day this morning. Just by way of introduction, I'm Henry Lubis. This is my contact info. I've been dealing with Sage 100 Contractor for almost 19 years. It'll be 19 years in February, so I have seen quite a lot of evolution in the product over those years. And I've also dealt with hundreds, if not thousands, of clients over that time. So, I've got a broad level of experience. Many of the people that I know have signed up, I have worked for. So hello, if we haven't chatted in a while. And for those of you who haven't chatted, if you feel free to call me after this for one-on-one consultation or review about anything we talk about. So again, in my 19 years dealing with construction companies, payroll is probably one of the, if you're a subcontractor especially, there's tons and tons of challenges and headaches that you will have with payroll for construction. First of all, how do I get time back from the field, right? If you're using a mobile time platform, what's the level of expertise of your workforce? Can they deal with a capture device? Can they legibly write on a piece of paper what they've done for that week, right? Payrolls in construction are usually weekly, right? So that adds burden. If you're an administrative company, sometimes you're bi-weekly or semi-monthly, takes some of the processing time off. Short turnaround time, being a weekly payroll, your time cards come in Monday or Tuesday, checks have to go out Wednesday or Thursday. Not to mention layoff checks or modifications of checks or fixes errors. You got to turn that around quite rapidly. Ever-changing workforce. People are coming and going all the time in the construction world, especially if you're in the union shop, right? You have a big job, you hire guys from the hall, you have to add those to the payroll system. Job costing. The key to any construction company that's self-performing is effectively managing your job cost. And many payroll providers don't do a good job, if at all, or don't do it at all. So that's why we have things like Sage 100. Applying burden to jobs. So if you're a union contractor and you want to track your actual cost of your annuities and pensions and et cetera, workers' comp, and applying that to a job, that's something that you have to worry about, right? And accruing your workers' comp. Prevailing wage. I don't even want to start with prevailing wage, how challenging that could be. Your rates change by job, by person, by what they did on the job that day or where they performed those tasks. So a big challenge, for contractors, especially with employee offsets. If you pay for employer-paid health insurance or pensions, you have to reduce that from the fringe package. And how do you do that? Again, union reporting. If you're a local 3 contractor on this call, I do feel for you. They tend to be, that's an electrical contractor, electrical union in New York City. They do happen to be one of the most challenging unions to deal with, right? And then of course, you always have payroll tax payments, making sure they're done timely and accurately so you avoid penalties and liability. Right. All same with filing of tax returns. I've had many people say, no, I used to do it in-house myself, and we got caught. I paid a big fine and penalty, so I never want to have to do that again. So, a lot of challenges in the construction industry related to payroll. So, how do the contractors deal with this? What are some of the strategies they've been employed over the past few years to deal with all of these challenges? Well, like I said, I've been doing this for 19 years. I have seen just about every strategy out there and available, and I advise people all the time on what would make some sense. But these are the 5 main areas I have seen. First of all, we use Sage 100 Contractor. We'll talk about what that looks like and what the pros and cons of each one of these are. But you do everything right in Sage. It's a pretty good solution for managing payroll for a construction company. Or they use an outside payroll service, but then they manually integrate back into the accounting platform. Well, how does that look like? Well, I've seen people do it with a journal entry. And then I've also seen them do a manual sync to a payroll record. Those of you using the software effectively know what the 522 screen is. We're going to spend some time looking at that. Or we've had a lot of success recently with using an outside payroll service with an electronic integration where we're syncing, either one way from the service to Sage or bidirectional. We're going to talk about that, how we've accomplished that, and what that looks like, right? So let's talk about doing payroll in Sage first. So Sage as 100 Contractor has a very, very capable and full-featured payroll system built right into the application. It's part of the core, and everything you need to do for payroll is built in. Your annual subscription keeps your tax tables up to date. And that also allows you to use one of our many time capture systems. So I've got a little preview up here where you can use Sage Service Operations is up here. HH2 is another good partner for us with Sage, and WorkMax is a third. Then depending on how you want to capture time from the field, one of these three are excellent solutions. We do have Atrix as a partner with Sage. That I'll show that here in a second too. That's where we do all our tax payments and tax filings. We're relieving some of that burden. But the real benefit of doing payroll in Sage is it has extensive job cost reports, union reports, certified reporting right out of the box. So if you're familiar with some of these things, you will see a certified payroll report, not just the federal form, but practically every state and jurisdiction is available out of the box. Union reporting, sometimes we'll customize them for clients for specific formats, but you do get a very good complement of union reports right out of the box. And all sorts of job, labor, journal reports are available throughout the application. So just if I'm going to jump into the software, I'll be going back and forth a little bit, but as an example, this is Sage 100 Contractor, and I mentioned earlier that if you look at what we can do here, we have certified payroll reports, union payroll reports, and if you're not familiar with this is Atrix, right? So Atrix is our tax filing engine. So with Atrix, if you want, you can actually come down to federal tax deposit, and if you put the appropriate dates in here, it will not only tell you what that value is, but for a nominal subscription per year, I think it's a couple $100 based on your level of employees, they will actually remit the taxes as long as you complete the process here. Same is true with W-2s. Atrix will print the W-2s if you choose. There's no extra cost for that. You can buy the paper, stamp, and envelope, or for roughly $2 per form, Sage or Atrix will email, print, fax, file, mail, and give you copies of your W-2s. I tell people often, if you were to use Sage Payroll in-house, you can't afford the stamp, the envelope, and the paper compared to what it's going to cost you to do that with Atrix. So if you choose to do payroll in-house, let's come back to my slide here. What are some of the pros and cons? And I'm going to go through this for every option I'm showing you. The pros are efficiencies. So you have one system to deal with, right? You're just keeping one set of tables up to date. But you have lots of time capture options, right? We showed you 3. There's more out there that you can choose. Your job costs, you can job cost down to jobs, phases, cost code, work orders, that'll vary, equipment costing, all sorts of job costing opportunities. You can accurately calculate and project your burden. So we have workers' comp rates built into the application based on person or task. We'll calculate, we'll produce your certified, your union, your T&M billing detail. And you have flexibility. You ever have to do a layoff check on a Tuesday, right? How do you do that with a payroll service? There are challenges sometimes with Sage. You would just go ahead in and write a check. And then cost. Oh, by the way, we also can do direct deposits in-house with Sage. And cost, I think it's part of your annual subscription. It's there. Small extra cost for Atrix, which is really nominal if you choose, but you don't have the requirement to pay for a payroll service, right? The downside, the cons, well, you have to pay the taxes, right? So if you don't, press that button I showed at the end of every week, or press the button at the end of every quarter or at the end of every year, your taxes aren't paid and your reports are not filed. So you have to take responsibility for doing that in-house. Sometimes that's not a problem for customers. Clerical requirements. You do have to print the checks and stuff the checks and Get them out to your employees. Sometimes people don't want to do that. And you are, again, responsible for statutory reporting. I would say probably 25 to 30% anecdotally of my clients, our clients here at the Accordant Company, are doing payroll in-house. Okay, so let's talk about outside payroll services. There are a number of excellent payroll providers throughout the country. Certainly everyone's familiar with ADP and Paychex. There's some, lower level, I shouldn't say lower, mid-level companies like Balance Point, Paylocity, Digit, Paycom, Paycor that are also out there. One thing I'll say universally about these companies is none of them are solely focused on construction. They do a great job with human resources and paying people and all sorts of employee portals and things of that nature. But when it comes to job costing, they all have deficiencies, despite what they might say to you if you were to entertain them in the sales process. At the end of the day, they're really just not geared for working with construction companies. There used to be a company called DSI, which probably was the only one I'm familiar with that was focused on the construction market. Unfortunately, recently purchased by ADP, so no longer available. So let's talk about another strategy called, I'm going to use an outside payroll company, but I'm going to integrate it via a journal entry. So we get the check register from our payroll provider, and we sit down and we do a journal entry inside of Sage. Well, what does that look like? Hang on one second. Let's go over here. So I happen to have created a journal entry that might reflect how that works, but basically you'd have to come in and allocate your cost either to a direct labor cost or overhead cost. And all of these values, sure, you can get them somewhere off of that report, but there is a manual analysis that you're going to have to go through to come up with the journal entry. The other requirement is you're going to have to job cost that labor. So of the all of the direct costs, as you're aware, you have to synchronize the job cost total to the GL total. And again, how does that happen? Are you doing some manual reconciliations back and forth? If you have a fairly stable workforce and your jobs only have a handful of jobs, this might not be an issue. But if you have a volatile workforce with lots of jobs, this could be a substantial challenge. One quick tip, not just related to this conversation, but in Sage, is if you do it that way, that's fine. But create a template. So come up here, load template. Here's a list of all my templates of the weekly payroll. It will bring in the default chart of accounts. So now maybe the next week I was 55,000 and 5,500 or whatever the numbers are. You could very easily change those numbers without needing to type all that in. So that is an option for sure that people have done. Come back to my slides real quick. So what does that mean? Well, if you were to do that, what are the pros? Hey, the payroll provider takes that responsibility for all your taxes and filings and keeping things up to date. Clerical efficiencies, you're not cutting checks, right? That's being handled by the payroll provider. And employee tools, a lot of these payroll providers have portals where people can make benefit selections or see copies of checks or change their withholdings. So there's lots of good reasons to use a payroll company. What are some of the cons? Well, how are we going to do time capture? If you want an automated time capture platform, what does the payroll provider provide? I have seen some of my clients attempt to use a time capture system from a payroll provider. It just doesn't quite have the job cost detail or the sensibilities or sensitivities to a construction firm. So there are sometimes challenges. How do you job cost? The journal entry is just a summary level job cost. I'm not showing you data by person, by gross, by day, right? How do I calculate burden? How do I calculate workers' comp? How do I calculate employer health insurance by job and charge it to the jobs? That becomes manual calculations. Certified union, T&M, all that's got to be, offline manual processes. And the cost, you're always going to have to pay for the payroll provider. But I do have many, many clients working in this fashion, and it works okay. So that's one strategy I have seen. The next strategy I have seen is you work with an outside payroll company, but you synchronize manually to the payroll record, to the 522 screen. So what does that mean? Well, that means you can, in fact, continue to use any one of our payroll time capture providers. Um, that you'll go to the 522 screen, enter your time. You will then work with your payroll provider offline. That means you then go onto your payroll provider, enter time however you work with them, and then when you're done, you come back into the 522 screen and reconcile every single check. If you do that, all of the SAGE certified union job cost T&M reporting is still intact. So what does that look like? Let's go back into SAGE. Let's open up the payroll record. And if I go to the last record in the file, basically what happens is this. You would come in first and enter your time like you might today in the 522. That gives us the opportunity to charge it to a specific job, charge it to a specific cost code. If there are prevailing wage pay groups, you can calculate what that might be. And at the end of the day, you can say, pay this employee $904. You would key that data into the payroll provider. And then at the end of the week, you get the payroll register back. You would do a trial calculation. I typically would set Sage up as if it was going to do payroll. So I might get lucky and have certain taxes calculate exactly to the penny. But if I don't, I have to go check by check and manually override with this override column. And I encourage people to do that right down to the penny so that you can get a true, accurate depiction. So if you have 10, 15, 20 employees, that's not a bad strategy. It's not going to take you long to do this manual synchronization. And if you were to do that, what are the pros and cons? Well, you still have all the benefits of a payroll provider and that they're the taxes and they're doing the checks, employee tools. You can now employ time capture options from Sage or things that talk to Sage. You will continue to get your job cost detail. You can have burden, you can put workers' comp, anything else out there. You can do all of your union certified reports and you have job costing flexibility. What's the downside of this approach? Clerical burden. Like I said, if you're doing 5 or 10 employees or 20 employees on a weekly basis, it's not going to take you that long. I have had clients do this and grow, and they get to 100, 150, 200 employees, and it's practically impossible as you grow and scale up. And of course, cost. There's always a cost to the payroll provider. I will have that listed in all my cons for the payroll company. So how do we solve for that? As you grow, as you get to that 100, 200, I have clients with 800, 1,000 employees. How do I deal with that? Well, what I have done a couple of times is I use an outside payroll company and we synchronize in a one-way sync. What does that mean? Well, that technically means that the payroll provider will capture data, and some are pretty good. You can actually capture your job number and cost code. And then we use a company called ZMex or Zoom Geeks to create an application that would then, from the payroll provider will provide us a series of files. We read those files, validate those files, and create the 522 record electronically. By the way, ZMex OneClick is a programming partner of ours that we deal with. They've created many, many apps, and if you're interested to learn what they do for us, we have a webinar on December 2nd. That invitation goes out this morning. After this session, join us on December 2nd. See some of the great things that we can do with ZMex. But let's talk about a one-way sync. What does that look like? Well, what we do is if I come into the payroll record, when I employ ZMex, you can see that we have this little button here. This little button is the window to the apps that they have created. By the way, I have done this sort of integration with a number of companies. You see Balance Point up here. I have had Paychecks. If you come back into here, you'll see Benefit Mall, DSI, Paylocity. So we've done it with a lot of them. Today, I'm just going to highlight Balance Point, just as an example. So what we do is now I've launched the app. You can see it opens up a window, and I'm going to hit the import button. Now what has happened is the files that come from in this case, Balance Point, I put into this folder, and I can define where that folder goes. We read that folder, and you can see I've redacted all the names on that. This is an actual copy of an actual client, but this is the data that's coming directly from the payroll company. check number 4051. For this employee number, the gross was this, and and we do validation. So we've done some validation. So if I have an invalid employee number or payroll calculation, we're doing all sorts of validation behind the scenes. I would then pick and choose. It tells me right down here that all 89 records in the file are valid. Now, typically, I would just click here and import all of those records. I've already done it, so I would hit the update button. I'm just going to show you what the result of that looks like. So if I go to the last payroll record in the file, I did not key this in, right? If you look at, there's no user information here. That came in from Zoom Geeks through our application. What did we import? We imported the employee name, the check date, the check number from the payroll service. In this case, the payroll service is capturing job information. So this came from the payroll company, right? $925. And then if I go to the calculation tab, you can see that all payroll calculations that the payroll provider has calculated are now overridden and accurately to the penny listed inside of Sage. My clients that do this will run a report, once all the records are imported and trial computed, and they will compare gross to net pay to the penny. And believe me, I do get phone calls. Hey, I'm off by $20 on a $100,000 payroll for the week, and you can in fact get to that level of accuracy, right? Now, if you notice too here, the other thing that happens is I can do things like workers' comp, right? That's not overridden. Why? Because the payroll provider doesn't know anything about workers' comp. We are managing workers' comp inside of Sage. In this company, by the way, the payroll provider is managing union costs, right? They didn't have to. I could have another client that says, no, I don't want my payroll provider to know anything about my union costs. I'm going to manage that inside of Sage. In that case, Sage would calculate that. So if I were to use this approach, I technically could do W-2s out of Sage because every single check, full gross to net, full taxability is tied directly back to what the payroll provider might have. So a very popular approach. And again, just come back to here. And what are some of the pros and cons of that? Well, again, go back to, we still have a payroll provider, clerical efficiency, employee tools. That's going to be consistent throughout every payroll provider. But because of the way I'm creating that record is I do have some, oops, sorry about that. I am going to have job cost detail because 522 is going to be posting to ledger and job costs. I can capture burden, and I can still do all my union certified T&M projects right out of Sage out of the box. Cons, again, clerical burden. You have to enter time back in time capture options. You're subject to what the payroll provider can provide for you. Flexibility, maybe the payroll provider only allows you to do checks once a week. And then what do you do when you have a layoff check or an emergency check or you made a mistake? Those are challenges I have seen with payroll providers. And of course, one of the cons is cost. You still have to pay for that payroll provider. But it's still a really good option, and I do have many clients using that very effectively. And the final approach we're going to talk about is a bidirectional sync. So what does that mean? Well, basically, you set up Sage as if you were going to do payroll in-house. It allows you create 522 records, time records, and again, you can still use whatever time capture system that we've talked about earlier, SSO, Sage Field Operations, HH2, WorkMax, that would populate directly into Sage. Using an app from ZMax, again, we extract data from Sage into a file that we upload to the payroll provider. When the payroll provider is done, they create a file, and then we sync right back to the 522 record. So again, let's take a look at what that looks like. So let me change my company real quick. So again, the workflow would be this. I would create my 522 record, right? So in this case, I just did a very simple transaction. Hang on one second. Very simple transaction. I'm going to pay this guy 40 hours at $50 an hour is his rate. His gross pay is going to be $2019.25. And hang on, let me just do one thing real quick, just reset this. So now what I do is I have an app that says export to balance point. Again, I have done this with paychecks. I've done it with a number of payroll providers, but balance point is the one I'm showing today. And oops, let's see. Okay, so as you can see here, I have a number of employees that I could pay and say, all right, let's go and send this record to the payroll company. And it's, if you notice, it says I've created this CSV file. So when I come back to the payroll record, it'll tell me up right here the payroll file that it's created. So we send that file out. You know, every payroll provider's got a different format. They have a different workflow process, but you would launch their typically a web tool, upload the file I just created. When they're done, they will send back to us the gross to net payroll file, what have you. We're going to import from Balance Point. And what happens is we now have another Zoom Geek app that says, okay, go read the files that I put into this folder, find the appropriate record inside of Sage, right? And the net pay from that company is, the payroll provider's net pay is $13.76. And let's select the one I want and import that back into Sage. So when I import it back into Sage, what happens is, let's refresh this. I come to the calculation tab. You'll notice that all my payroll calculations are in fact overridden with the exact values that came back from Sage. I am still doing my manual burden for workers' comp and anything else I'd like. But my net pay in Sage is $13.62.19, which is exactly the net pay that we've had from the payroll provider. Again, like before, with the one-way sync, I could technically do W-2s out of Sage because every single pay record, paycheck written by the payroll provider is in Sage down to the penny. Now, why is that important? Well, come back to my slides. Again, same kind of payroll, same pros. I would say the other thing that sync that pushes one more item into the pro column is now we can leverage the time capture options that we have seen earlier in the presentation for Sage, right? And you're still getting that detailed job costing information back into the platform. Cons, again, clerical burden, you still have to manage maybe, you know, the flexibility. I'm sorry, you have to manage getting those files and doing two systems and cost. You always have a cost of a payroll provider. So having said that, I'm coming up right to the bottom of the hour. I want to see, Krista, do we have any questions in our chat window?
There are no questions at this time. If you do have a question, no questions. You must have did a fabulous job.
Wow, must have been great. By the way, if you do have questions and you want to talk to me offline about what strategy might be the best strategy for you and your company, by all means, give me a call after this meeting, send me an email. I'm happy to work with you guys any way that we can. You know, I just like to summarize by saying, you know, payroll for a construction company is challenging. There are a number of strategies that I have seen people use quite successfully. Not sure what the best is for your company, but if you'd like to explore that, please give me a call. I'd love to chat with you.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending. Again, we will email out the recording to everyone later today. Everyone stay safe and healthy and have a great day. Bye now.